plane. And you can make the box cutters out of plastic, very strong plastic, those famous box cutters that were used in 9/11. So nothing's really being stopped here, but it may stop a few crazies from bringing stuff through, like the guy who had explosives in his shoes, but he was obviously not a very high-level operative.
So you don't think we really have to watch out for the 88-year-old grandmother who wants to visit her grandkids down in Florida? If they're in a wheelchair and they have a bag strapped to them, you don't think that that's a likely person to be a threat to society, John?
Well, I don't think she is too dangerous, and neither do I think my toothpaste is all that dangerous, whether it's 3 ounces or 5 ounces. I think my 5-ounce toothpaste is no more dangerous than my 3-ounce toothpaste.
Right.
But anyway, so it's about fear, you know. And incidentally, let's talk about terrorism a little bit. There's no such thing as global terrorism. There are global acts of terror, but an ism is something that has a common ideology, a common principle. Catholicism, socialism, communism, capitalism, those are true isms, Protestantism. But, you know, I've interviewed members of FARC in Colombia and Somali pirates and members of Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, and they do not have anything in common with each other. Colombian FARC people are poor peasants whose lands have been destroyed by hydroelectric plants and oil companies. Somali pirates are former fishermen whose waters have been fished clean by illegal huge foreign industrial vessels, and have also been polluted, some of it with nuclear pollution out of our base in Diego Garcia, one of the largest U.S. military bases in the world. And they can't feed their children, so they turn to piracy. They create acts of terror, yes, but they're not united. There is no such thing as global terrorism. And the way to get rid of those acts of terror is not by sending in the military, it's by solving the problems that create it. It's by giving those peasants in Colombia new farms, a way to make a living, to feed their children. It's by giving the Somali pirates back their fishing waters and their fish, or giving them a way to grow fish, perhaps. I don't know, but it's not through military means. The terrorists that I've known, and I've interviewed a lot of them, do not want to be terrorists. They'll tell you, you know, fishing is a dangerous enough venture. Piracy is terribly dangerous. I don't want to do that. They're poor, desperate people. Now, I do want to say that they're often led by people like bin Laden, who was not poor or desperate. He came from a very wealthy family. He was a fanatic. And I think there'll always be fanatics in the world, just like there'll always be rapists and people with a few nuts loose in their brains. But they won't have a following, a massive following, unless you've got desperate people. So if we really want to do away with acts of terror around the world, let's not put our money into TSA and more security systems. Let's not put our money into building up a bigger military. Obama today talked about more of the Ranger-type units, the Special Forces units. Let's instead put our money into helping starving people feed themselves, into getting rid of extreme poverty and disease around the world, providing ways for the Somali people to feed their children, and for the peasants of Colombia and everywhere else in the world to feed their children. That's the way to do away with acts of terror.
But those acts, John, they tend to decentralize power, which is something that you and I want. We want people to have power. We want the individual to have power and freedom and abundance. But that takes away power from all of these centralized control systems, the status quo, the governments, the corporations, the military-industrial complex, right? And the evil genius of their system is the more anti-terrorist police state stuff they roll out, the more it makes people afraid, the more it pushes people into desperation, and then the more violent acts they can either create or point to justify their own existence. How do we stop that cycle, John?
Well, we stop that cycle by saying, no more of that. You know, we're not going to support that any longer. Hey, listen, you know, take our tax dollars, and instead of paying General Dynamics and General Electric and General Motors and all the other generals out there to make tanks and armored plate and missiles, let's pay these same companies to come up with methods for cleaning up the terrible pollution of the world. The whole world is very polluted. We've got polluted soil all over where farmers can no longer grow things organically in many countries. They have to be dependent on chemicals and pesticides and fertilizers. Let's change that. And let's pay the Monsantos and the Doles and the Chiquitas, these companies that do terrible things to farmers around the world. Let's pay them instead to come up with means for growing food more efficiently and storing it and distributing it. Pay these same corporations to do things that are good, that'll create a peaceful world and a sustainable world for us. And also, let's put a lot of money into encouraging young entrepreneurs who are coming out of college today. I speak at universities around this country and many other countries, and at MBA programs, and these kids are coming out of school with huge amounts of debt, and there's no jobs. But I tell them, hey, this is the time to create jobs. There's a whole new economy out there that's waiting to happen. We need to create this new economy. Let's put our taxpayer monies to helping these people do that, rather than underpinning the kingpins of Wall Street and the big corporations that are responsible for doing so much damage.
Yeah, I think that's a great message to end as we're just getting close to the end of the show, John. We can add just a little bit more about your book, Hoodwinked, or any kind of solutions that you'd like to add to end the show. But I think that is the main point. If someone feels overwhelmed by all of the stuff that's going on in the world, realize that they have tremendous individual power. That the only way that the globalists and these people are trying to, the few that are trying to control the many, and all of these terrible things that are happening, the worst thing that the individual can do is feel afraid, feel helpless, and feel like they can't do anything. And as soon as they stop themselves, the individual, John, I'd like to get your opinion and your take on this. As soon as the individual says, look, this is the first line of defense for myself and for everybody that I care about around me, is that I will not be afraid. I will instead do the opposite. I will reach out and try to help someone today who will so much appreciate it, turn around and help somebody else. I could go on and on for an hour about all the times where seemingly somebody would tell me, oh, Jonathan, don't bother to help that person. They're a lost cause. They're not interested in what you have to say about natural health, natural living, or helping somebody else to turn their life around. And I said, nonsense. I'm not going to listen to this stuff about being afraid about what I say or how I act. Just go out there, try to help somebody, and it's amazing how the world can change. And just one little quick example, John, and I'll let you take the floor, just about the TSA that you mentioned. We all can remember, if we think back at the beginning of all these scanners that were put into place, it was around Thanksgiving time, and on the internet, it was so much screamed and yelled. I believe Mike Adams on naturalnews.com, Alex Jones on the Alex Jones Show, everybody was saying, look, enough is enough. We all have to band together. We've got to boycott this thing. And what do you think happened? The establishment shut down the machines. None of it was used on Thanksgiving Day. Why? Because they felt the presence of enough people saying enough was enough. And you know what? Everything you said today on this show, John, the power of the people showed up on that one day as a perfect example of everything you're saying. John, your take, please.
Well, it's a great example, and I would encourage you. And incidentally, I have a newsletter that goes out on my website. If people will subscribe to it, they have to go to my website, johnperkins.org, and subscribe. And we talk about twice a month. I put out things that talk about this and what we can do, and the things that are outlined in Hoodwinked, which we go into a lot of detail of what every individual can do. But I think if we really boil it down, as you just did, Jonathan, that's a beautiful way to put it. And if everybody who's at all discouraged would just think of who's your hero, think of a few heroes in your life, and really look at them, and you'll see that those heroes were just human beings like you, and they did something. Rosa Parks walked to the front of a bus and changed history. Rachel Carson wrote a book called Silent Spring and started a whole environmental movement. But when she sat down at her desk in a little house in Pennsylvania and began to scribble into an old notebook, she had no idea that it was ever going to be published, much less that it would create a whole environmental movement with her book Silent Spring. And you can go on and on. Every great thing that's ever happened started with one individual So I think, if all of your listeners would take heart in that, and everybody has passion and everybody has talents. So if each of your listeners will follow their passions and use their talents in whatever way they can, but let's all head for the same destination of a sustainable, just, peaceful world, a world that my grandson and every other child on this planet is going to want to inherit. And if we all do that, we'll get there.
That's great.
Got a follow-up question for you, John. I love what you just said. It was right on. And yet it requires people to have some sense of awareness, some sense of self-worth, and some sense of how present actions and conscious decisions affect future outcomes. And yet across society, in too many cases today, we see a population that has been lulled into a sense of comfort or ignorance. And you even see some people who worship the very system that is crushing them. Do you think that those people have a role too? Do some of them transform? Do they change? Do they disappear? Do they rebel? I mean, what's their role in this transformation?
I would say that everybody listening to your program that none of the people listening to your program fall into that category.
Right.
They probably wouldn't be here.
Yes.
And they don't have to worry about the other people out there, because the world is always changed by critical mass. A very small number of people have a huge influence. And I would dare say that the people listening to this program tonight, if every one of us takes action, that follows our passions and uses our talents, that's enough. I really believe that's enough. It will happen, and it is happening around the world. And we should all realize on this program that we're not alone. I'm on a lot of programs. I speak at a lot of conventions and so forth. There's a tremendous number of people out there that want change. There'll always be some that'll just spend the rest of their lives watching Monday Night Football on every night, not just Monday, and zoning out. I'm just using that obviously as a humorous analogy, but people zoning out on television or whatever they zone out on. But that doesn't matter. What matters is that those of us who are tuned in, who are listening to this program, that we actually get up tomorrow morning and say, every single day for the rest of my life, I'm going to take some action, even if it's just sending one email. Doesn't have to be a big thing, but every single day I'm going to take some action to making this a better world. It will happen.
All right, John, just want to thank you so much again for joining us. I know you've got to run. The website, folks, is johnperkins.org. Check out all his books on Amazon.com and other booksellers everywhere. John, you're a great person, a great soul. Thank you. Have a wonderful evening, and we hope to talk to you again in the near future.
Thank you, guys, and keep up your good work. You are the freedom of the press. And I'd also like to encourage people to go to, I have a Facebook fan page, and I'm on Twitter at Economic_Hitman. So I'd like to keep in touch with your listeners and see you around.
All right, there goes John. Economic_Hitman, that's the Facebook. Or was that Twitter or was that Facebook?
That was on Twitter. God bless you, John.
Yeah.
And I'm sure all of you joined me as well online and by telephone. It was just an amazing show. John's a busy guy. He's got a lot of shows that he does literally on a daily basis, so he had to run. But again, I want to thank all of you for joining us. I especially want to thank Mike Adams for co-hosting this show. Mike, thanks a lot.
Hey, happy to be here. This is fun.
Great.
And thank you, everybody, for listening. Check out more. By the way, we're going to post the highlights of this interview on YouTube and naturalnews.tv. And then the complete interview will be available through the Inner Circle.
Great.
So thank you all.
Thanks very much. I wish you all a happy and a healthy new year. Take care, everybody.